What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Of course, today kicked off week 4 of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. It began a day late, and there was no testimony, on Friday, but they were back at it today. Of course, it is the trial of the so-called Doomsday Mom, the wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a self-proclaimed devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who clearly veered way off course and became involved in the deaths of as many as 5 people, including her own children. We've got our best guest panel in full force. You all know good Lori. Lori Hellis is an author and a retired criminal defense attorney. She moved to Boise, Idaho, where I hope it was warmer today, to help write her book titled Children of Darkness and Light, which is also the name of her YouTube channel. Her blog is the Lori Vallow Story. Read it, I do. Meanwhile, you've also got Boise lawyer Jessica Bublitz, a skilled litigator with more than 20 years of courtroom litigation experience. She's tried numerous cases in both state and federal courts and is the first woman in Idaho to be named a top 100 trial lawyer by the National Trial Lawyers. And then you've got the prosecutor of the year, Josh Ritter. He was named 2015 Outstanding Prosecutor of the Year by the Association of Deputy District Attorneys. I was just watching first 48 hours, this weekend, minding my business, and who shows up on CBS but Josh Ritter. He's you see him everywhere. He is a partner in the Eldabe Ritter Trial Lawyers firm, and he also hosts the podcast True Crime Daily, The Sidebar. Check out that podcast, True Crime Daily, The Sidebar, with Josh Ritter. Please remember to follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. That's where I post all the show times. And speaking of that, my dear mother is being honored tomorrow night at a Holocaust event, so we will do the podcast at 8 p.m., a little bit later, 8 p.m. Eastern time. We make exceptions for events like that. You can also listen to us and give us a nice review if you'd like, and you can support us on Patreon and become a YouTube member. Someone is asking, how do I become a YouTube member? I think you just sign up right on the homepage. The chief marketing officer will have to give directions. There it is. Support STS, subscribe, hit the like button, and become a STS YouTube member. And perhaps most exciting, we've got a merch store open now, thanks to the chief marketing officer, and you can find the link on all of those sites, but it's also on the YouTube homepage. Without further ado, to the good Lori. How was court today? You had quite the week last week. You were asked to leave. You were back in there today. Any issues?
No issues. And I'm a little over it because I feel like I'm not going to give the judge any more space in my head than he already takes up. So, but I'm in the overflow viewing area, which, to be honest, is a lot more comfortable than sitting on the church pews in the courtroom. And it was, from a viewer's standpoint, it probably was a bit of a slow day because we had 2 officers on. The first one, Detective Stubbs, was a holdover from Friday. And a lot of what he testified to were really just the nuts and bolts of requesting warrants and what happened when they asked for warrants. And I mean, he literally was just going through a list of each warrant they had requested and what had been returned. And so not a lot of really meaty information coming from him. Same with GPS collection and cell phone extraction collection. And he really was just on there to talk about the collection methodology. So not super fascinating. There were a couple of, I thought, interesting little tidbits that came out. One was that Lori Vallow on in July of 2019, just a couple of weeks before JJ died. I was just pulling it up on my computer here.
Yeah, no worries.
I was just pulling it up on my laptop, which went to sleep. On the 21st of July, Lori searched for Gerber Grow Up life insurance plans for children. And of course, 2 weeks later, JJ died. It doesn't appear that she actually bought life insurance for him, but she did search for it, which I thought was probably the juiciest of the tidbits that came out today. And the other witness that was on the stand was Nicole Heidman. She's with the FBI and she's an evidence technician. And a lot of what she was on to talk about was, again, data collection, phone extractions, those sorts of information. She did a lot of Google, pulling up all the Google searches that they had done, and a lot of the Google GPS information. And then the last person that was on was Nick. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell whether it's Valance or Balance, so I wasn't sure whether it was with.
I think it's with a B. A B with two L's, like a balance beam, but with two L's.
Well, that's what I thought, but it wasn't super clear from the viewing room. So he's the FBI special agent that came on to talk about cellular phone analysis, and specifically CAST phone analysis. And there have been some scientific challenges to the CAST. CAST isn't an analysis of any new information, but it's a different way of applying sort of an algorithm to the information that's collected from cell phones. And it's somewhat controversial. There have been some challenges recently to it on the basis of scientific data. So,
and we'll dig deeper into some of the details from today, because I kind of went through it all. Obviously, that issue about Chad texting his wife about burying a raccoon, that is still top of mind for a lot of people, that he, quote unquote, allegedly buried a raccoon in the pet cemetery. Good Lori tweeted out, because I follow her because she's in the courtroom, or in the viewing room. She tweeted out this afternoon, "We are finally getting to the nitty gritty. Mapping Alex Cox's phone on September 9th, 2019 from midnight until 5 a.m. Did anything come of that, Lori, about the mapping? A lot of the stuff today was about digital forensics, but did anything come of that? And then we'll move on to Jessica and Josh.
Well, sure. I don't think it was information anybody who follows the case didn't already know, but it was certainly new information to the jury. And that was that Alex's phone was located in Chad Daybell's backyard both days that the children disappeared. So on the day that Tylee disappeared, Alex Cox's phone was in Chad Daybell's backyard for a fair amount of time, couple of hours, I think. And so that was information that's new to the jury, because they were able to literally locate, and they were talking about whether or not, how accurate it was. And it was in one instance, plus or minus 3 meters from the pinpoint in Chad's backyard, right at the fire pit.
Jessica, to you, do defense attorneys generally believe in coincidence that Alex Cox's phone just happened to be pinging in the backyard? That's question number one. And question number two, what about what good Lori was just saying about the fact that bad Lori was looking up these Gerber children's life insurance policies? That seems pretty incriminating.
Right. I think that they're establishing motive a lot when it comes to Lori. I think that they're doing a good job of showing her interest financially. I was very skeptical of the whole sex, money, and power motive that they were going to try to show. But I think that they've done a good job, better than I could have anticipated, of establishing that she really had an interest monetarily in these deaths, from the Social Security collections to the life insurance policies. And so they are doing a good job with that motive. We're looking more for also the connections to the crime itself of conspiracy and aid and abet. So although they're doing a good job of building up the motive, they need to show the elements of the crime that they intend to prove. And when it comes to the conspiracy, I think that there is a lot to point towards Alex. I think there is quite a bit to point towards Chad and Alex. And then the key is going to be linking her to that as well, beyond just the psychotic indifference to knowing that her children were likely buried there and gone. And they need to show that she was part of the agreement for this to happen. And so I do think that they're placing Alex at the scene of the crime. They are showing Chad was likely involved through some of his searches established today, like wind direction or raccoons. It's his yard. So they're doing a good job of making some of those connections with Chad. We've got to see the connections being pulled out with Lori. And some of the cross-examination was subtle, but headed that direction today, as I understand.
And Jessica, I mean, how soon do they need to get to that? Because we're moving along at a pretty quick clip here. So it's time to get there soon, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would have thought, I mean, although we're going through a lot of sort of technical things today, this would have been the day to draw out some of those communications. And probably tomorrow, I understand they're going to keep going along this track for a while. So we need some of those communications. We need to establish, they're establishing the frequency of the communication on the nights in question of when the children likely died. But, you know, to show that she was communicating all through those nights with Chad or with Alex, that's something. And it may be enough. It really might be. I'm looking to see what they have. And so me being, you know, a defense attorney, I'm going to be looking a little skeptically at, you know, where are the holes and where can they tie up those holes? And they need to establish those connections really clearly.
And STS Nation on top of their game, firing off questions. Josh, we have discussed this in the past, but maybe you can put a little bow on it from SDL. Do you think that the judge, attorneys, and the jury being, or most of them at least, LDS, is one of the reasons they don't want cameras in the courtroom? This has come up, you know, time and again, but do you think it is in any way related to the religion of some of the people participating in the trial itself?
I hope not. I mean, I hope that the judge is not making decisions based on that. But then again, it's, you know, probably Jessica can speak better to this than I can. But I know from having visited Idaho, I have family who lives up there, that it really is hard to understate kind of how that religion really does permeate a lot of the communities up there. And it's, I don't know if he had a special sensitivity to that in making this decision, but I would hope not, because the decision really should be based upon whether or not it's going to preserve or protect the integrity of the trial somehow, because otherwise I think the default position should be towards more transparency. And I think that's kind of part of the frustration that you might be seeing with some of the media and the way that the judge has restricted a lot of that in this case, and the fact that we're getting basically zero live feed and only having, you know, the benefit of some reporters and journalists and others like Lori who are in there, but, you know, she's giving still her kind of secondhand understanding of what's taking place. It would be great to kind of get that directly. And, you know, I know that we're getting audio later, but again, there's something missing when you're not able to cover things live. And I understand that that's purely within the purview of the judge to make that decision, but it's still a curious one that he made that in this case to me.
And Josh, you answered that so well. Want to answer Sonia's question? Hi, everybody. My question is, if Lori pled guilty, do you think Chad pleads guilty too? Before you answer that, I think this is it. Shelley says neither would ever plead guilty. They don't think they did anything wrong, sadly. But assuming they did, if one did with the other.
I don't think there's a way that Chad ever pleads guilty because the death penalty's on the table for him. So that's the hugest motivator. He's might as well take his chances when you're looking at that kind of greatest penalty that we have. If she were to plead guilty at this point, which I don't think that we're going to get this far into this trial with, really, we've seen, unless there's something I'm not anticipating, we've seen probably the most damaging evidence so far. Unless she cuts some sort of a deal that somehow gets her out of life without parole in some sort of cooperation against him, I doubt that we're going to see a plea out of either of them. And again, and this is all if the death penalty remains on the table for Chad. I could see him accepting something that kind of spares his life in that sense.
There was reporting about Lori's behavior in the courtroom today. She seemed to be pretty even-keeled. She was listening to Detective Stubbs from the Rexburg, Idaho Police Department for the first half of the day, apparently writing on her notepad and talking to her attorneys. In the morning, she appeared very involved. And then Sensory Combustion writes, keep waiting to see the headline where Lori just loses it and goes bat crap crazy. She really has nothing to lose. Lori, since that meltdown, about a week ago, where she asked to leave the court, are you surprised that she seems to be within the range of what appears to be normal right now?
No, because I think she's pretty adequately medicated. I think they have fine-tuned her medications, so she's doing okay. Yeah, there's only been the one time, and that was when the explicit testimony and pictures were coming out about finding the children, that she was that she was upset about it and asked to have her appearance waived. The judge denied that. She sat with her arms crossed, looked pretty angry about his decision, and then later in the afternoon appeared to nod off. So I did want to point out, there was a comment earlier about the judge, the attorneys, and the jury all being members of the LDS Church. I don't believe that is true of the jury. We weren't privy to those questions when they were asked of the jury, so we don't know for certain. But just statistically looking at the demographics in Boise, one of the reasons why they moved the trial here is because, unlike Rexburg, Rexburg is a community that was founded by the LDS Church in the 1880s, and it has a 96% population membership in the church. Boise, the statistics are more like 16% of the population. So if that holds with the jury, then we're looking at one or two jurors, I would say. So I think it's less likely that we have faithful LDS members. I did hear Rachel Smith today say she is not a member of the church. But as far as I know, she's the only one.
And love these comments from Crash Day. I will pronounce it. Let's do this. I'm new to STS, but I'm loving this channel. Great to have you. And look at STS Nation, Shelly T, even welcoming her. So nice to have you. The best thing, STS Nation, the best thing you guys can do besides hitting that like button, tell a friend. Tell a friend. It's like the Brady Bunch. Then the boxes, double, triple, quadruple. So best thing you can do. Lori, this was slated to be an 8-week trial. We're just starting week 4. Are you still under the impression that this is going to be over much sooner than later?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually wouldn't be surprised to see opening statements or closing statements by Friday, maybe Monday. I think that we have probably one more full day of tech stuff, GPS, that kind of stuff, DNA. I think we're going to see the medical examiner and the medical autopsy reports. And beyond that, I think I don't expect that we're going to see a lot of defense witnesses. And so
Do you think we'll see any? Do you think we'll see any defense witnesses?
I think it's possible we could see no defense witnesses.
Wow. And Lori, grab this question since you're intimately involved with the case. I want to know, when Lori's verdict comes in from Carrie G, how quickly will Chad serve her with divorce papers? Do you think that will actually be a reality?
I don't know. I think my opinion is Lori is still all in, but I don't know where Chad's head's at. So I have no idea. In Idaho, there is an exception to the, and Jessica, you're better to talk about this than me, to the marital privilege rules for abuse or neglect, I think, of one of the parties' children. So they can't claim the marital privilege as it applies to kids, but potentially they could claim it as yes, you're right. She is a smart cookie. They could potentially claim it as it applies to Tammy. So I don't know whether it does them much good. But
Jessica, any follow up on that?
Yeah, I don't see that doing them much good either. And I think what's interesting is that Lori had wanted to consult with Chad about strategy during the preparation stage of the trial. She wanted to get together with him and come up with some sort of a co-defense. He didn't seem interested in that. My impression is not that he has any interest in what she does with her case. I think he's on his own track. I think he's going to provide his own defense. I think that they're still going to go through all of the evidence. They have chosen a completely different route than Lori has. I'm still worried about the speedy trial issue with Lori. Even though they took the death penalty off the table, with a conviction, there's still speedy trial issues that they're going to have to address on appeal.
Explain that a little further, Jessica. What do you mean by that?
So in Idaho, you have to, within 6 months of pleading not guilty, have your trial statutorily. All right. So and then there are certain exceptions for when the defense has sort of waived that privilege, not explicitly, but implicitly, by maybe motions to continue or other things that Lori could have done to sort of not say she's waiving the privilege, but if she caused a delay, she can't take advantage of that delay. They X'd out the time period when she was not competent. Okay, so they took that period off the table because that part you can't count. But as I understand it, if you count 6 months from not guilty to the trial, she still managed to get outside that 6 month time period, even with the time period
days.
By 40, is that right? 42
days, yeah.
So they have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they took the death penalty off the table, and the judge said when he took the death penalty off the table, I'm trying to lower the scrutiny on this case. That's why he did it. He didn't want the appellate court to look at this and go, the stakes are so darn high here with it being a death penalty case that you better have done everything perfectly constitutionally or we're going to throw it out, right? That's what he was scared of. And so he took that death penalty off the table. But I still believe that they may have an issue there because Lori did not waive her right to speedy trial. And I don't know that she did enough to waive any of that extra time period. She went to the mat on this stuff, even without time to review all the evidence, even with all of the late disclosures that the state made. Her counsel said, we're going for it. We're going to trial. And so even with a conviction, they're going to have to contend with that issue. And maybe taking the death penalty off the table saved it, but it might not have.
Yeah, I think that the two issues that are going to be hot on appeal are going to be how much of Charles Vallow's murder came in even after the 404B order that the judge issued, and then the speedy trial issue. I think those are the two that are give them the most liability.
Did her attorneys raise that objection on the waiving speedy trial issue?
Oh yeah, all the way along.
Oh yeah, and Chad didn't. That's why Chad still, right? Chad waived his right to speedy
He
trial,
waived. Yeah.
and he said he needed more time. And because Chad said he needed more time to go through all this evidence, and he waived his right to speedy trial, they severed the cases.
Right.
Chad goes on his own track. Lori,
Josh, does that smell like a problem to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, unless the judge, in response to those objections by their attorneys, made some sort of finding that, you know, he's tolling the time because of the time that she was, you know, there was a doubt declared or something, some sort of finding that he put on the record. They have to preserve that. In order for it to be appealed, they have to have preserved it. So if they made the objections, they preserved it. And now what I imagine is probably what Jessica's leaning towards is the idea that they took the death penalty off the table. Maybe now when it goes up on appeal, I don't know the standard, some sort of abuse of discretion. They're going to say that, you know, no harm, no foul here. Yeah, it was 40 days, but that didn't really affect her constitutional rights enough to have us overturn this or send this back down for another trial, given the fact that she's not facing the death penalty is I think, Jessica, where you were kind of going with that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Diane McDonald weighing in. Hello, good Lori from Nampa, Idaho. Love to have Idahoans here. And look at this. Christina referring to Bublitz as a badass. Bublitz, hashtag Bublitz badass. I love it. Josh, in broader terms, last couple of days, it's been a little tedious, if we're being honest here. It's been going over digital forensics, phone records, you know, phones pinging, different messages, different email addresses. Is it a concern for defense attorneys or the state that they're going to lose jurors during that kind of testimony? And what do you do to ensure that you're not? Because some of this stuff is important, obviously.
I think they are probably going to lose some of them. I mean, people are going to zone out because a lot of it is not all that thrilling. But this is, you know, it's housekeeping for the most part. They've got to enter a lot of this so that they can make the arguments in closing, so that they can put a lot of that evidence back into the deliberation room. They have to kind of go through this tedious, like I said, housekeeping. There's ways that they can make it a little more interesting to watch, but quite frankly, they're probably not all that concerned whether or not the jurors are getting all of the minutia of how they've gotten these records and how they were able to, you know, secure the proper warrants and whatnot, just as long as the end result is that they have the proper evidence in front of them when they go back into the deliberation room. But to answer your question, I've seen it done a number of ways. Some of it's very dry and they just try to get it through as quickly as they can. And, you know, they know jurors are not going to pay attention to a lot of it, but they got to get it done. And then I've seen other attorneys who do a masterful job of, you know, they put up PowerPoints and they really kind of make some of this boring stuff come to life, which again, you know, might be worth the effort if you think it's really important for the jurors to understand, you know, how the sausage was made, as it were. But here they might just be thinking, okay, we're going to have a couple of days of really boring testimony, but we need that done because we need them to have this stuff back into the deliberation room at the close of this case.
And just for the record, for the STS court reporter, it might be tedious in the Boise courtroom, but never on STS Nation. We always make it exciting because we've got the best guests. Lori, to you from Tilo, who is a Bostonian and has a Boston accent, from what I gather, and can have some Boston-tude. How many witnesses do you guys think the defense will call? We just talked about this, but she asked who they will be. You're not sure if they'll call anyone, but if they do call someone, who do you think it could be for the defense?
Well, I think that I don't know about Lori's attorneys, but I do know that John Pryor asked a lot of questions about the CAS data. And so it may be that they call an expert to bring into question the science behind the cell phone pinpointing locations. But from a completely practical standpoint, I don't know how they get. I mean, the only people they can call are maybe Lori's family to say, but she's a great mom and she would never do this. I don't know. I mean,
By the way, speaking of that, is Janice Cox Lori's mother? Is she scheduled to testify? I know people had seen her in Boise. Is any word on that?
we know that Summer was in the courtroom today. That's Lori's youngest sister. We have not heard any word about her, but once again, the witness lists are all sealed. So we don't know who's getting called until they call their name and bring them to the stand.
By the way, I love this comment. Adam Blue Fire. I finally caught STS Nation, Joel and Company live. I'm based in Barcelona, Spain. Joel, you're brilliant. Maybe not that part is not too accurate. A true crime king. Pin up. And then this one's funny because it's in the past tense from Carol Bamforth. I've enjoyed your podcast, Joel. I don't know if that means she no longer does. But Lori led me right into Summer Shiflett, Lori's sister.
Right.
She was in the courtroom today. She was there with her uncle, who is Lori Vallow's brother. And it was noted by court reporters in the courtroom, I should say, that Lori was taking a lot of notes in the morning. She did not appear to be looking back at her sister much. What was your take on their interaction, being siblings in there?
Well, I don't think Lori's had a lot of interaction with too many people. She did make some contact and exchange some smiles with Zulema. Colby wouldn't look at her, so I don't know how much contact they had. Summer is Lori's sister, so her brother, if it's her brother Adam, that would be Lori's brother as well. So I don't know who was there. I didn't hear that part. But we do know that one of the police officers or one of the jail staff was brought in early, and they entered into evidence 3 jail calls, one with Colby, one that she had with Chad Daybell the day the kids' bodies were found, and the third one was a video conference with Summer. That one we haven't heard yet, so I'm assuming we'll hear that when Summer takes a stand. But we haven't heard anything because all the witness lists are sealed about whether or not Janice is going to testify.
Got it. Laura Waldy writes, hi, Joel and best guests. Hey, SES Nation, tuning in from the wild north, a.k.a. Ontario, Canada. Happy to see Josh Ritter back. I'm a huge fan of True Crime Daily Sidebar. Awesome. So if you haven't checked out that podcast, please do.
Thank you, Laura.
Josh, it says Summer and her family are sitting in the rows reserved for the state, for prosecution, not the defense. She was able to be in there for other witnesses because Judge Boyce deemed her Tylee's representative. What kind of foreshadowing is that she's on the state side and not the defense side? How do people read into that?
It's funny. It's like a wedding, right? Everybody's trying to figure out who they're with. I don't know. I mean, if they're taking that whole situation very seriously, maybe that is some pretty serious foreshadowing. I tell you, who is kind of paying attention to that stuff are jurors who might have been bored today, or paying attention to little details like that and taking notice of where people are sitting. And certainly Lori, who she's paying attention to and looking back at. And it is funny, we've done a lot of kind of micro analysis of Lori Vallow's behavior through this whole trial. How did she react to the photographs? How is she reacting to this testimony? Is she taking notes? Is she talking to her attorneys? And you could argue that, maybe we're getting too much into the weeds about her demeanor, but the jurors really do pay attention to that stuff. My experience is that, especially when they feel that it's important testimony or very damaging testimony or testimony that's very personal to the defendant, you've got 12 sets of eyes who immediately dart over to that defendant and see what their reaction is. And so, yeah, it is important to kind of take note of things like, is she taking notes? Because the jurors are watching, especially what is she taking notes about? Is she looking back at people? Where are people sitting in the courtroom? So all of this stuff might sound, are we getting too far into kind of our analysis of this? But it's important to the jurors for sure.
And I think Jessica last time said she's probably doodling just to appear busy, but who knows? Tilo writes, so Nicole Heidemann, she's a FBI special agent that was testifying today, did testify they had 18 different phone numbers between Lori, Chad, and Alex within a short period of time. Chad, for example, had 9 phone numbers between just October 2018 and January 2020. Jessica, I've had my same Jersey area code number since the inception of cell phones. What does it say to a jury when their burner phones and a gazillion different cell phones that these people owned? I mean, what is the necessity for that other than if you're up to no good?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense because nobody would need that many phone numbers and that many phones and everything that these guys were doing. They were, it just adds to the circumstantial evidence of them all having some sort of scheme that they were all involved in, which is where the state wants to go with this, that there was some sort of a plan, a conspiracy, something was going on, that they were scheming between the 3 of them all the time, and these phones and phone numbers and all of that just adds to that, right? Because there just isn't a reason. There's no innocent reason why you would need that many phone. It just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, they're building a really strong circumstantial case that they were all involved in these planning potentially of the murders together. I would like to see the actual communications. What were they saying? What were they calling? What were they saying on those phone calls to each other? And I'm sure that's what the jury would like to see too. What were the text messages actually saying that we're going back and forth at 2 and 3 in the morning? Because we're all just guessing. And, when you guys were talking about looking at the mannerisms of the people in the courtroom, and it's frustrating that we can't all be there and see it, right? That we can't all get our own sense of what the feeling is in the courtroom. We can hear it, but a picture speaks 1,000 words for a reason, because you can really see how people are responding when they're not responding verbally. You can see their body language, and you can read all these things that we're all just getting secondhand from people like Lori Hellis when she's able to be there. On the few occasions that I'm able to be there, I can get a better sense of what's going on. And you just have to, how public is this trial? How is this a public trial when you have to get a ticket, when you have to try at 8 o'clock in the morning to be the first in line, and then you get a number, and if your ticket doesn't get picked, then you get in the feed room. I think that's going to be looked at the end of this case. I hope it's going to be looked at, because I think this needs to be taken up by a higher court. It needs to be looked at as to what the word public means in the modern era, and what kind of access that should be. Because we don't have a public trial here. This is trial by dark ages. And we're all just doing our best to sort of glean what we can from it.
Trial by dark ages. There's a soundbite right there. Brenda Redmond. Josh, back to you. I asked you a short time ago, there was a question about whether religion is influencing the furtiveness, the secretiveness of this case. Brenda writes, the case is not about religion. It's about power, money, and sex, followed up by Stephanie Ella, please leave LDS out of it. And there's a little bit of a conversation going on in the chat. Can you address that from your own perspective?
Yeah, I think it is funny because the LDS has come up. It can't be avoided, right? It was such a big part of her life and Chad's life, even though, from all accounts, they really strayed away from the teachings of that church, and it kind of became this more cultish, obsession with end of days sort of thing. But in one sense, it really, that comment is true. It's really not about that. This really, as much as it has been portrayed about this kind of, you know, her being a goddess and saving the children from being zombies and everything else. We're finding out sometimes it had to do with money, and sometimes it had to do with her just wanting to move on with her life with this other man. And there are all of these other motives that have nothing to do with religion, but the religion is kind of one of the backdrop characters to this whole thing that I don't think could have been avoided. So yeah, I don't know enough about the religion itself or the way it touches that community, but it does seem as though to have ignored it in this whole trial would have been a mistake by the prosecution in particular.
Adam Bluefire is back. What puzzles me, good Lori, is how bad Lori's Coven Circle all claim to have been manipulated into these events, but yet they were doing castings. They act innocent, but they played a part by facilitating Lori. Any response to that comment from your point of view?
Well, sure. I don't think there's any doubt, but I think that they were all, to a person, people who were very naive in a lot of ways and were manipulated into this belief system. And not to say that they didn't go willingly, they all did. They all joined into all of the castings and the sort of supernatural sorts of behaviors. They certainly all went willingly into it, but I think that they were all pretty naive, vulnerable sorts of people that were pulled into it as well.
Jill Schneider, good Lori, writes, I thought one of the most interesting things today was the Google search about removing the back seat of the Jeep. That actually came up at about 10:30 local time in the morning, 10:24 to be precise, and it was with Detective David Stubbs from the Rexburg PD department, who was still on the witness stand, and he said that the user searched for the word possessed and also how to remove the rear seat of my Jeep Wrangler. What is the significance of that, good Lori?
Well, those of us who've been following the case for a while had heard that information before. The Jeep Wrangler that had been Tylee's car, and of course, by that time, Tylee was already dead, was in Arizona. No, I'm sorry, was in Rexburg. And Alex Cox, there is highway license plate reader and camera footage that puts him leaving Rexburg, driving to Chandler, and then being in Chandler at the time that Brandon Boudreaux was shot at in October of 2019. And so there's also footage of Chad and Lori putting what appears to be the third row seat out of the Wrangler and the back spare tire into the notorious storage room. So it all sort of lines up time-wise. They took the back seat and the tire off because you can't open the back window while the spare tire is on. And he needed the back window open in order to shoot out of it. So they took the back seat out. There's video of them putting it in the storage unit, and then a few days later going back and getting it back out of the storage unit and presumably putting it back in the car. So we don't know that there was a driver and a shooter in the car. I think what they believe is that Alex was all the way in the back of the car, took the shot, and then kind of dove over the seats and got into the driver's side and drove away. There's no indication there was a second person who was driving when Brandon Boudreaux was shot at. But that was the purpose of that video, or that search, was they were having trouble getting that third row seat out, and they had to watch a YouTube video to figure out how to get the seat out.
Jessica Bublitz, to you, the same detective is on the stand, and the issue of malachite rings, wedding rings, comes up again. It comes from a email account called Lolly Time, and he found it on August 25th, 2019. The user of the account was looking for malachite wedding rings and wedding rings made of malachite. The user ordered an 11.5 size ring and a 4.2 malachite ring. The total amount was around $808. It caught the detective's attention because Charles Vallow had died just the month before, and Chad was still married to Tammy. And he says on the stand, we were thinking it was odd for her to be looking at wedding rings at that time. How impactful is that on a jury of her peers? Again, it's not the proverbial smoking gun, and it's still not connecting her directly, but how impactful is it?
Well, they're establishing more motive. I mean, that's more of what they've been able to establish, is some of what we're talking about with her wanting to be with Chad, these obsessive tendencies that she had with him, trying to get with him through using fake email accounts and things like that in the beginning, and then just trying to plan wedding events and things around this time period, I think goes to that mind state that they're showing that she had throughout all of this, which is just completely, they're showing that she has a lack of empathy is too nice of a word. It's dehumanity, that she's looking at rings and things that she shouldn't be focused on at all as a mother. And so I think that they're doing a good job of establishing her lack of humanity and her lack of empathy and her motive to be somebody who would actually do these things. So that's all going to be very strong evidence for the jury. The juries in general want to see justice done in a very general sense, right? They want to see the bad guy be punished, period. And so they're doing a good job of showing how awful these people are. And so I think they're really, really going to want to convict her, right? When this is all said and done. Very similar to the Alec Murdaugh sort of situation. And they were really able in his trial to show, where his issues were just as a basic fundamental human being, or where that family was. And that's what they're showing with her. And so I think that's going to go a long way towards actually getting a conviction. All that sort of conspiratorial stuff is. I mean, behavioral stuff.
Yeah. Good Lori. Maggie Sokol writes, will Lori be charged with murder, conspiracy for murder, and Joe Ryan, Charles Vallow, or Alex Cox's death? 6 deaths here. Joe Ryan, Charles Vallow, Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, Tammy Daybell, and Alex Cox. And that's followed up by Ann Vroom, who writes, any thoughts about what the jury instruction or instructions will be concerning conspiracy charges? Is there an Idaho legal definition of conspiracy, legal elements, etc.? Thank you. Maybe Jessica's better fit for that. Go ahead, Jessica.
Right.
Jessica's probably better for that.
Yeah, I've looked at the jury instructions. They're online of what they intend to prove for the conspiracy. It's interesting because they challenged some of this, or her defense attorneys did at various points in the process. They tried to show how confusing this jury instruction actually is, and it really is. So for conspiracy, you have to show the agreement, right? That this agreement existed to do something, to commit murder. And then there has to be what's called a substantial step. And so they've put forward what they believe to be substantial steps towards that conspiracy. Those substantial steps include things like collecting the Social Security benefits. Even Chad Googling wind direction was considered a substantial step. So if they find the agreement, it will be very easy to get the conviction on the conspiracy. It's the agreement part that they're really going to have to legally make that link.
Good Lori, to you. Do you want to go back to this one for
Sure.
Maggie, which is a little more broad?
Sure. I also think they could argue that some of those agreements could be something as simple as she's Googling wedding dresses and making wedding plans in Kauai. That sort of presupposes he's not going to have a wife. So I think that they could argue that that goes to the issue of the agreement. I agree that the link that links up that is still a little bit fuzzy. As to who's going to get charged and who's not, Joe Ryan's death was ruled natural causes. They reopened and reinvestigated it after they found the podcast recording where Lori said she was going to murder him if the bishop didn't give her a temple recommend, because she was either going to turn her life to the temple or she was going to commit murder. They reopened Joe Ryan's, what they could of his death investigation. His body was cremated. They did preserve some tissue samples and they were able to go back and retest those. But let's remember, and I'm sure everybody else on the panel can attest to this as well, toxicology isn't a very fine-combed science, because literally they have to test for each individual substance. So they start with the most obvious ones and work to the more rare ones, but it's not an easy science or one that catches everything. So there's really no way to know in those toxicology kinds of tests. They've ruled his death from natural causes. Likewise, they have ruled Alex Cox's death from natural causes. And
both young guys.
Yeah, and I'm actually of the opinion that Alex Cox committed suicide, but I think people's opinions are sort of split about that. As to Charles,
why do you think he would have killed himself?
Well, he died just a day after Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed. And he was already saying to Zulema, I think I'm their fall guy. I think I'm their, I'm going to be the victim, for lack of a better word. And I think that he believed them when they said, no matter what happens, we're all sealed together. We're all going to be together in the celestial kingdom. So if you go now, you'll just be getting us a spot ready for us all when we get there. So I that's my opinion. As to Charles Vallow, Lori has been charged with conspiracy to murder him in Arizona. She hasn't been arraigned yet, but she's been charged. So, and the prosecution at that time said they didn't have sufficient evidence to charge Chad. That could change depending on what happens in this case.
And the death penalty in that could be on the table potentially for Lori, because
conspiracy is not a death penalty. It is not a death penalty crime in Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Real quickly here for you, good Lori. Brenda writes, Chad texting Tammy that he shot a raccoon. So did he mean Tylee? Did Chad shoot Tylee? What was your take on that?
So I don't think we'll ever know. I think that what he was doing was he was explaining to her why the area in their pet cemetery had been disturbed and dug up. And he was trying to explain to her why the burn pit had been going in a kind of an unusual time. One of the neighbors said, yes, they used to go out and hang out around this fire pit in the evenings in the summertime, but it was unusual for them to be out there once the weather started to cool. So I think he was trying to explain to Tammy why the burn pit might have been going, why the ground was disturbed in the yard. We'll never know what happened to Tylee. I think we've heard from the initial questions to the jury about, could you find that someone was guilty even if you didn't know how that person died? I don't believe they've ever been able to establish a cause of death for Tylee because her body was so destroyed. And I don't think there was enough of it left for them to determine that. So I don't know that the one thing that I think is interesting about that text message is he talks about burning the limbs off the trees. And I think that was just a very Freudian slip on his part, because he was they were burning her limbs.
Yeah,
And some of the photographs were some of the only bones that were recovered were the long bones in her body.
yeah,
So
that's difficult to hear.
I know it is
Yeah,
hard to hear.
yeah, it's brutal. Anna writes to the prosecutor of the year, Josh Ritter, 2015, prosecutor of the year. So far, the prosecution has shown that Lori is a reprehensible person. The most incriminating evidence is the early search for wedding gear and her ability to lie to police about JJ's whereabouts. This goes back to what Jessica was talking about. If you're the state right now, Josh, are you worried that you're not connecting the dots enough and crossing those T's enough?
I think they actually should be worried. I kind of echo Jessica's feelings on this. I think they've done a really good job of showing motive. I think they've done a really good job of showing consciousness of guilt. I think circumstantially, like that commenter said, we find these people to be reprehensible, but that's all of that stuff are not the elements of the crime here. They're going to have to satisfy the elements of the crime, and they're going to have to, most importantly, as Jessica said, and I'm just going to piggyback on it because I thought it was such a good comment. Where's the agreement? They're going to have to, we have to see something beforehand that shows that they were in agreement to have committed this, because so far they're not connecting her directly to having taken the lives of those children. So other than the fact that she had a motive, we could argue, to do it, and other than she behaves very bizarrely afterwards, that's all stuff that the defense could say, listen, many people can say they have a motive. We could find many people say they have a motive to do something. Doesn't mean they did it. And many people may act strangely and having benefited from something after it took place doesn't mean they planned and agreed to do it beforehand. That's what we're all sitting here about. Did they agree and plan together to have committed this horrible crime? And those are the dots they're going to need to connect. And I'm not saying they haven't done it. I'm just saying so far, that's the part where I think they need to address most of their attention moving forward in these last few days of the trial.
And back to Good Lori and then to Jessica for something. Questions are coming in here from Christina, Good Lori. And this was put in an interesting way, and I never thought of it as basically these kids were sacrificial lambs. Christina writing, wonder if this was some type of satanic ritualistic sacrifice dismembered, and how little JJ's hands were bound, ? People used to sacrifice their children to Moloch. Is it your opinion that they were being sacrificed for sort of their own demented religious or cult, purposes?
I don't know if I would put it as a sacrifice as much as I would put it as a mercy. If you listen to Colby's conversation with his mom, she says over and over again, you don't understand. Only I understand what's going on. We're still sealed together. They're happy. They're free. We're all going to be together. So I took that phone call to mean that she really was feeling like she had done them a mercy because she had freed them because they were possessed. And so I don't know that I would say that it was that, but I do recall that Zulema testified that Chad told Lori that there was a very narrow 2-minute window when you did a casting and you got a demon out of a body, then you had a very short window in which to destroy the body before another demon moved in, and that you couldn't free the body and therefore free the person's spirit without destroying the body. And the two methods were fire and dismemberment. So
yeah. KCL, who is a friend of the show, I think watching from Utah, if I remember correctly. And she writes, Jessica, as an attorney would do here, Lori's ties to the conspiracy 1, line of police that Tylee was attending BYU. 2, Lori holding a casting out for Tammy on the same night Alex shot at Tammy. Then Lori chewing Alex out for missing. Legally, is KCL onto something here with the ties to conspiracy?
Oh yeah, and I mean, when they do the closing argument, what they're going to have to do is lay it all out like that. They're going to have to make it as clear as possible. Each part of the evidence that they believe go towards each part of the element of the crime, and they're going to have to take what's a very complicated case and tie it all together for the jury the way that they see it, and show each and every activity that they think they've shown, that they've presented in the evidence, that ties Lori to all of this, not just by knowledge, but the one comment there that she was upset that Alex missed, that goes towards her participation in some way, right? And they're going to have to lay all of that out for the jury on why they believe these things all show that she was a participant, that she was in agreement, that she was doing things in furtherance of trying to make these things happen, and that she was an active part of it and not just acquiescing. I'm fine with it happening. It happened. They're doing this. And being sort of someone who's accepting that it's happening without agreeing that it should happen. So that is the prosecutor's job. And I think that they're going to have to really tie it all together in their closing argument.
I've got a little case of the Monday, so we'll go a few more minutes and then wrap this sucker up. But Mercina Lady writes, good evening, panel from Connecticut. I think the jury, to Josh here, has caught Lori in so many lies and heard damaging circumstantial evidence, the jury will easily render a guilty verdict. What do you think, Josh?
I agree with the first part of the comment. I think that they have been caught in lies. I don't know if I would call it easy. Jurors, I think for the most part, are kind of common sense. They don't get tied up in the weeds too much when it comes down to the elements. But if they do, again, to go back to Jessica's point, they're going to have to find, agreement here, because you're right. She has been caught in lies, but a lot of the lies had to do with after the fact, where were the children and what were they up to? Well, that might be, I was aware that they were murdered, or I knew that they had done that, but is that the same thing as I took part in it or I agreed to it ahead of time? Because the idea of helping someone get away with murder is very different than conspiring with someone to have committed a murder. And that's what they're trying to find her guilty of here. So again, I don't want to get a bunch of hate comments from people who feel that I somehow believe she's not guilty. I think she is guilty and responsible for this, but I think that the prosecution, and that may be done through closing arguments, as Jessica said, if they can tie those pieces together, connect those dots in closing arguments, then I think they have probably put enough in front of the jurors at this point.
And a shout out to Jimmy and Jeannie C, friends of the show, who say they watch Josh Ritter's Crime Daily Sidebar show. So shout out to them. Josh, grab this one too from Ann Vroom. Doesn't seem the defense has been very aggressive and cross towards establishing the storyline. Alex did this all by himself without Lori's prior knowledge. Should we look for more of that in the defense's case? Is the defense, I don't know, being weak here?
Yeah, that's a great question, because in their opening statements, I really thought we were going to see either a lot of alibi evidence or at least cross-examination concerning that, or third-party culpability is what I would call it, saying, listen, the police were so myopic in the way they investigated this. They went after our client. They should have been going after other people. And that just doesn't seem to have materialized in the way that their cross has come out, which when you start to hear these reports, and I don't know, I know that the witness list is under seal, but when you start to hear these reports about them perhaps not calling any witnesses, you begin to wonder what exactly is the defense theory here, because it doesn't seem as though they've laid the basis for that adequately during cross-examination. They can get up and argue, I guess, what they want, but I just don't see that. I don't see them having teased that out through the questions that they've had in cross so far.
Frankie Figs, a friend of the show, to Jessica Bublitz. What happens if the conviction gets overturned on appeal because of the speedy trial issue? Then what?
Well, I don't know that it will get overturned. I wasn't trying to say that it would for sure get overturned. It's just that that's a huge concern. And I think that that's something that they're going to have to address at some point in time at the appellate level. But I wasn't trying to say that it would for sure. I just think that that they're running a really high risk that that's going to happen. Yeah.
And Jessica, good Lori brought this up. 10:06 a.m., Detective Stubbs from Rexburg, Idaho, is on the witness stand. He says that in reviewing Chad Daybell's search history from September 8th, the user of the account looked up what the wind direction was going to be for the next day. Stubbs says that this was significant because that is, quote unquote, the day Chad Daybell had said he was going to burn limbs and killed a raccoon in his yard. I mean, important testimony, but he's not the one on trial here.
Right.
So what is the purpose of really bringing that to the forefront today?
Is that
for you, Jessica?
Okay. Well,
I thought you just thought it was a really dumb question. So you're like,
No, and you're absolutely right. That is very significant for Chad to show his participation. And the more that people are seeing these communications between Chad and Lori that night, the more that they can link that she was involved or knew what Chad was up to. That puts her a little closer. It puts her closer than if it was just Alex on his own who was doing these things, I think. And they're definitely able to show that through that phone call with her and Chad, that she knew that the children were buried there, and that they may very well be found. And so that she was definitely had that knowledge is significant. And then the fact that he planned it or had some sort of participation in it is also, it does show or implicate her to some extent. So but it is very, very bad for Chad. I mean, there's a lot of evidence in this case that's going to be very, very bad for Chad.
And this is an interesting question, which I don't fully understand, I have to say, but that doesn't mean anything. Barbie Rice says, Jessica, why doesn't the speedy trial clock start when they separated these cases? Hard to try them together when one wants a speedy and the other one wants extra time.
Well, that's why they had to separate the two cases. They really didn't have a choice, because Chad's attorney wanted the extra time to go through all this information. And he was saying in court several times that they had disclosed so many things so late that he simply didn't have the time to go through it all. I don't know if Lori's attorneys had time to go through it all. I don't know. Did they manage to go through it all? Have they been able to see all this evidence? Do they know what's coming their way? I have no idea. But Chad's attorneys were saying that it would be an impossible task to go through it all. And he had waived speedy trial. And so they wanted more time. They get more time. They would have gladly given Lori more time as well if she had waived speedy trial, but she didn't, so they couldn't. And you know, it's going to be interesting what that additional, if there's other evidence that comes out in Chad's trial that we didn't see in this case because nobody had time to go through it.
My recollection is that the judge excluded some of it because it came in after the discovery deadline. And so it was excluded in Lori's trial, but it will come in Chad's.
Good Lord to you, Lita. I saw your earlier comment, and I'm not sure about the answer, but she is in fact a Patreon member. So thank you, Lita. And she's asking good Lori about bad Lori. Have any of bad Lori's relatives testified? As far as I know, no so far, correct?
The only one is Colby, her son, Colby Ryan.
Correct.
He testified, but none of her side of the family, her parents, her siblings, no, none of them.
And what about this, good Lori, from Raul Thomas? Wasn't Summers' husband trending on the dark scale based on Chad's scoring system?
You know, I don't remember, but it's very possible because he often scored spouses dark. I think that is in part because he wanted to recruit them to have new marriages to other members of the 144,000. I mean, that's what happened with Melanie and Brandon Boudreaux. Was he told Melanie that Brandon had gone dark and was a zombie and she needed to divorce him.
Polio, back to you, good Lori, because you're the one there. What does the jury look like? Interested or bored?
Well, I'm not allowed in the courtroom anymore, so it's a little hard for me to tell because the video feed doesn't show the jury. It's purposefully pointed away from the jury. When I was in the courtroom, I would say that they were pretty engaged, but I haven't been in there since some of this more technical, dry information has started coming out.
One more piece of testimony that I just thought was kind of interesting to Josh. 9:07 in the morning, the same detective from Rexburg's on the stand, and he explains that with one of the warrants, he writes, it says, if you were to drop a pin in the middle of Chad's property and make a circle 250 meters, about the size of 2.5 football fields, and then you did the same at Lori's apartment and ballooned it out as well, we asked Google for any devices that would be within those circular fences. We wanted to know every device they could use, given certain time frames on key dates, so we could see any additional devices that were moving or in common with these two, and it goes on and on and on. But the point here is, it sounds, first of all, this guy Stubbs, who was on the stand, had a tremendous amount of training in digital forensics. But the point that I think can be made here is that Rexburg PD appears to have done a really good job in terms of their work on digital forensics, and in essence combed both residences to see the kind of movement. So that would obviously influence a jury in terms of good police work, right, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. It is amazing how savvy law enforcement is becoming to a lot of this stuff. They're usually a little bit behind, but it seems as though that more and more we're seeing cases where they're becoming far more savvy with kind of using electronic devices and all the information that is contained on our phones, which is staggering to know how much they can tell about where we were and what we were looking at and what we were talking about at almost every minute of the day. But then using that forensically, in other words, applying that towards how does that further their investigation and their case. It made me think of, we have another case out of Idaho with Koberger, where they did a lot of that kind of forensic stuff to track where the suspect was at different times, when his phone was off, when it wasn't. And it's just this continuing evolution in law enforcement, but you're really starting to see it have a tremendous effect with jurors who are also savvy to that, who also understand how much information can be contained on our phone and different devices that we all have, and how that can be used to really reconstruct a crime scene, reconstruct where people were and what they were doing at different times to almost disturbing amounts of detail.
We'll take this final comment before we start to close it out from Cheerio Shell. To you, good Lori. Lori and Alex's sibling relationship gives off flowers in the attic vibes. Gross. My dear mother, who is a licensed therapist, said it is basically an incestuous relationship, but she didn't know if there was the SEX word involved or not. But Lori, you've had time to think about this and how disturbing it is. What do you make of it?
I think they were a family who had very poor boundaries. We also heard stories about the fact that Lori's parents frequently talked about their intimate life. And I think that there was sort of an across the board lack of boundaries in that family. So I don't know whether Alex and Lori had an intimate relationship, but it does sound sort of inappropriate. I mean, she would come in the house and they would greet each other because she would jump up on him and wrap her legs around him, and then he would bounce her up and down, and he talked about how hot she was, and I mean, clearly there were boundary issues. So I don't know whether it went beyond that, but still, I think that was part of what led them to have that really enmeshed relationship where he would do anything for her.
His name is Josh Ritter. He's got the slick hair. He was a 2015 Outstanding Prosecutor of the Year by the Association of Deputy District Attorneys. He is a partner in El Dabe Ritter Trial Lawyers. And perhaps most importantly, he hosts the podcast True Crime Daily, The Sidebar. Josh, to you, Pew Willie writes, this trial will forever go down as the transparency and public access prevention trial, where constitutional rights of the people and the citizen-free press were intentionally placed on life support. Do you agree with that?
I don't know if I get as hyperbolic about it, but I think it shows that, you could understand the concern that judges had maybe a couple decades ago with allowing cameras in the courtroom and how that might affect the dynamics of things. But in this modern age, it's almost the opposite. We're almost more bothered if there aren't cameras to show us everything that's going on. And I think it's always good that we're moving towards more transparency. I wish the judge would have done it here, but keep in mind our entire federal system doesn't allow cameras in the courtroom. I mean, we as a country, we talk about, and somebody asked the question before, how is it called public if you're not allowed cameras in there? It's a good question. I mean, I don't understand I understand that the law is always several steps around every other innovation, but you would expect them to kind of start to embrace this more, and I hope that they do.
Jessica Bublitz. She is a skilled litigator with more than 20 years of courtroom litigation experience, but you don't need to be told that. You just have to hear her on Surviving the Survivor to know she is a quote-unquote badass, as one STS Nation member said today. She is the first woman in Idaho to be named a top 100 trial lawyer by the National Trial Lawyers. Jessica, Cindy is asking, will any of the excluded discovery from this trial be used for Chad's trial? And then followed by this, Joel always manages to get the best guess. You're looking at three of them right there. What about that discovery question?
Can you hear the rain on my windows here in the background? This is more of this great Boise weather that we're having. I don't know.
I can hear it in mine.
40 degrees and lashing rain. It's great. Yes, I think that it will all be used in Chad's trial unless they have some other basis to keep it out. But if Lori I didn't know that they had excluded some of it for the timeliness of it or what was excluded. But yes, that will not pertain to Chad. So if it was for timeliness in Lori's case, it will come in Chad's case unless they find some other reason to keep it out. So it might be really interesting to see evidence that they didn't get to show in Lori's case, if it's valuable evidence in Chad's case.
And you've got Lori Hellis, who is probably pondering right now the move to Boise from sunny Arizona. She is a retired criminal defense attorney and an author. She moved to Boise to help write this, her book entitled, Children of Darkness and Light, which is also the name of her YouTube channel. So check that out. And the blog is the Lori Vallow Story. Tanya writes, thank you, good Lori, for being our eyes and ears for the trial. I only trust you and Gigi with info. I talked to Gigi yesterday. She is working to get on our show this week. But she's getting snatched up by all the big TV stations. So we are working to get her, and hopefully we will get her here. Obviously a question in jest, but I like where he's going. When is Chad's raccoon trial scheduled? Lori, your final thoughts on this rainy, cold, blustery Boise day?
I'm going to be back at it tomorrow, rain or shine. And I don't believe that Chad's raccoon trial has been scheduled yet. I think they're waiting for the outcome of Lori's case first.
And we will be back on this tomorrow. So a quick programming note. We have Greg Skordas, who ran for Attorney General of Utah, and a new guest named Chris Thomas, who has written a book on Mormonism. He is a Mormon himself, and he has followed this case very closely, and he's going to give us his take on all that has gone on. That is 8 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow night. And then Wednesday, we're going to be doing an earlier show, and I will talk to you about that, 12:30 p.m. On Wednesday. But until then, love you, America. Love you, Boise. Love you, LA. See you soon.